So I strategically went and networked, and I asked my PA, my executive assistant, to get me lunch, tea, coffee, elevator conversation, I don't care what it is, with every CEO in the Lloyds market and the CEOs of the 10 largest brokers. And that meant about 80 of these meetings I had to do just to introduce myself. And something in me told me I needed to do that. And then when I got to be on the list for the Lloyds CEO job, and the nominating committee and the chair of Lloyds asked the CEOs in the market if they knew me, they all said, "Oh yes, of course we know Inga."
It's time! Work, play, evolve!
I want to connect the listeners to the best of the best. Welcome to the Evolved Broker Podcast. I'm your host, Pat Costello, the co-founder and principal at Evolve MGA. Our mission for the podcast is to bring the insurance industry the best of the best. My guest today was the first female CEO of Lloyds of London in its 335-year history. She's a dame, which is the female equivalent of a knight, and received that honor for her services to the UK economy during her time as CEO. Lloyds of London, for those that don't know, is the oldest insurance market in the world and has around $40 billion in gross written premium. My guest today is international businesswoman Inga Beale. Inga was instrumental in modernizing Lloyds by moving it from a paper-based environment to an electronic trading environment. She is also openly bisexual and is a powerful advocate for diversity and inclusion. She helped start the Insurance Supper Club for female executives and the Pride at Lloyd internal employee resource group. As you can imagine, she has an incredible story, and she serves as a shining role model for progress and for achievement in the industry. Inga and I discussed her childhood and how she was rebellious when she was younger, key moments in her career that prepared her to be CEO of Lloyds, the history of Lloyds of London, creating change in an extremely traditional institution, how coming out as bisexual influenced her career, and what it's like to be a dame. Without further ado, here's Inga. Inga, welcome to the Evolve Broker Podcast.
Well, thank you. Thanks for including me.
I'm so excited to have you. It truly is an honor. There are not enough people, especially in the US, that know about you, your story, the impact that you've had on the industry, and Lloyds of London in general. And frankly, you are an icon when it comes to progress, not only for the insurance world, but for the business world in general. So I would love to start out by diving into your childhood, if that's okay with you. Was there anything unique about your childhood or that your parents taught you that you think helped you out in your career?
Well, one thing they taught me was about humility, and I feel very humbled by your opening remarks there, so thank you very much. But actually, I did have quite an interesting childhood. So early on, and I'm talking when I was about 5, I was the middle child, and I had an older brother and a younger sister who got on extremely well. And they both had white blonde hair. My mother being Norwegian, a lot of people expected us all to have this white blonde hair. I know I'm a bit grey these days, but I used to have dark brown hair. So my brother and sister actually used to call me adopted. And whatever my parents did, I mean, they tried to console me and to assure me that I wasn't adopted. And they assured me that they loved me just as much as my brother and sister. But there was something that happened from a very, very early age for me about that sibling connection between my brother and sister. So I did grow to be perhaps a little bit independent and at quite a young age. Despite my parents being the most loving, caring parents, and they were together until, sadly, they're both dead now, but, they never divorced or separated. So we had a very happy childhood in a way, but my brother and sister did cause me a bit of trouble early on.
I read that you were a bit of a rebel as a child. Can you talk about that rebellious side that you had growing up and if it benefited you at all?
When I first went to what we called the high school at that time, and that was when I was 11. So you're 11, 12 is when you go to this sort of big grown-up school. By then I was still behaving myself quite well, actually. But at the end of the first year, I always remember my French teacher saying how disappointed she was because my father was actually a linguist and a language teacher. And I came second in the French exam that year. So that was at the end of the first period.
Okay.
And I can remember being so upset and angry with her because I thought I did brilliantly because I was second, but she basically made out I should have come first. And from that point, that kind of triggered something in me to start being really badly behaved at school. So the next semester when I came back, that was when I started to be such a rebel, and my parents didn't know what to do with me. They were threatening to send me to live with my spinster aunts and all sorts of things. And I don't really know what it was, but that sort of independent streak that had perhaps come from my very early childhood, plus this teacher who had a profound impact on me in a negative way, made me a bit of a rebel. And even when I was 16, the headmaster, the head teacher of the school, said to me, "Oh, well, Inga, if you don't start to behave better, we're not going to allow you to finish your education here." So what, of course, did I do? I said, "Well, stuff you then. I'm going to go off and do my own thing." So I went and studied at a different college to finish my education, and I didn't finish my education at school just because he made me so angry. So yes, I was a bit of a rebel. I didn't do anything that bad, but I suppose in terms of the community I grew up in, the school I went to, I was rated as one of the least badly behaved girls there were.
Well, in 2013, you were named the first female CEO of Lloyds of London in its 330-year history. Was there any key moments in your career leading up to that point that you would point to and say, I think these were monumental moments that helped me be prepared for taking on the role of CEO of the world's most well-known insurance brand?
I'd had great opportunities in the past, and particularly when I worked at GE, I think they were my most formative years. And that was basically from when I was 28 through to 43. And that was a period in my life where GE was very proactive in terms of supporting women. So I got promotion. I got opportunities to move from London to the US to live and work. They then moved me back to Europe. I went to Paris in France. Then they moved me to Munich in Germany. And I kept getting a bigger and bigger job. So they were very instrumental years for me. But then when they sold the organization to Swiss Re, I actually had a choice of either going to Swiss Re or taking over as CEO of Converium. Now, Converium was a spin-off from the Zurich Insurance Group. It was the reinsurance arm. It had been called Zurich Re back in the day. And in the early 2000s, Zurich had been going through a bit of a bad patch, and they'd been selling off all sorts of assets. And they spun off the reinsurance piece and called it Converium. They did an IPO. Now, a few years after that, it had got into some difficulty. Huge asbestosis and other long-tail reserves had come to bite it. And it was in a terrible state. It had been downgraded by all the rating agencies. And they'd had to let the CEO go. And they'd be basically without a CEO for about a year. And they approached me just at the same time the Swiss Re transaction was going through. And I thought, wow, do I go and try and fix this and do a turnaround and be a CEO of a publicly listed company for the first time in my life? Do I take that risk and move country again, because now that was going to be in Zurich, Switzerland, or do I stay with Swiss Re? Well, I took the plunge and I took the Converium role. And I think that helped. Well, it certainly gave me a fast track learning of how to run a publicly listed company. I had shareholders to deal with, many of whom were very, very angry and upset because the share price had collapsed and all their wealth had gone. They wanted to know what I was going to do to fix it. And then the media in Switzerland were all over me because I was the first female CEO of a publicly listed financial services business in Switzerland ever. I was British.
Yes.
And, in their eyes, I was quite young because I was 43. And so I had all this attention, and I wasn't prepared for any of it, but it was a huge learning for me. And doing that transformation and doing that turnaround was great sort of, pedigree or learning, if you like, for them, the Lloyd's job, when we were doing lots of transformation. And then after the Converium saga, where we sold it to SCOR, I joined the Zurich Insurance Group. And one of the roles I had there was as head of transformation there. So again, I've been involved in major transformations. So by the time I got to be offered the Lloyd's role or be considered for the Lloyd's role, of course, I'd worked in many markets. And I'd had lots of experience of transforming things and moving them on to the modern day. And so, I guess that was why they chose me. Yeah.
That's so cool. So it sounds like you're instrumental in righting the ship in, each place that you went. I got to ask, when you got the call or the email that you were named the Lloyd's CEO, what was it like? I imagine it must have been wild.
Well, I have to go back just a few months, because when I got the call from the search firm, I assumed that they just wanted to have a woman on the list. And I never imagined, and I thought back to the 80s when I started, right in the heart of London, next to the Lloyd's market, next to the Lloyd's building. And to me, in the 80s, as a young woman, it was the most scary place on earth. So here I was now being approached for this job. I didn't think it was real. I thought, they just need to have some women on the list. So when I first went through some interviews, I was quite relaxed about it. And I think that might have helped me actually perhaps have a confidence that, if I thought they were serious, I might not have demonstrated. I might have been too nervous. And then it started to get more serious, and I had to have more and more interviews. I think I had to be interviewed by something like 36 people in total for that job. It was absolutely extraordinary. And by the time I was in interview or meeting the 24th person, I said to my husband, I think they're serious. And so I think when I actually got the confirmation, it wasn't such a surprise because of the long time it took to go through that whole process. Because in the UK, Lloyd's is a sort of very special institution. It's not like a company. It's governed by statute. So if you want anything changed, you've got to take it right through Parliament, and it's an extraordinary beast. And so that's why there was this sort of extra, I suppose, check and control over who they were going to hire.
Well, when you became CEO, one of your biggest initiatives was bringing a completely paper-based environment into the digital world. Can you talk about what it takes to bring an institution through massive change, especially an institution that is entrenched in tradition like Lloyd's?
Well, first of all, I did not have the answer. So I had not got it all planned out when I arrived. I did spend my first 90, 100 days talking and listening, because I needed to uncover why it hadn't happened before. Why had previous attempts to digitize the market failed? So I spent a lot of time talking to a lot of people, and it began to dawn on me that they hadn't been involved. It had been done in the past in a sort of top-down authoritative way, and it's a marketplace. So people, they're not your employees. Thousands and thousands of people are not your employees. You can influence and bring them along with you. But sort of a central team prior to my arrival had been just telling people what to do. You're going to use this. This is the way. And they had said no. They'd resisted. So one of the key things I needed to do was to start including people. Now that was a tough ask, because I went to the board and said, need a little bit more time before I get started, please. And they said, no, you've got to get going straight away. Been waiting decades for this, there's no time. But actually I worked hard, and I said, look, I explained why, and I said, I've got to include people. And we need to do all that groundwork, that foundation building with these people and get them involved so that they can build their own future. And then we'll be successful. So that was the approach I took. Although I didn't know I was going to do that before I actually started having conversations.
I think there's a lot of folks in the insurance industry, especially in the US, that are completely unfamiliar with Lloyds of London. And I actually got a unique experience with Lloyds because I was able to intern at a Lloyds wholesaler when I was in college in 2011. And it was an awesome experience just seeing the history of the building and learning about how everything worked and the formality of everything from an underwriter dealing with a broker on the floor. For someone that is unfamiliar with Lloyds, can you talk about why Lloyds was founded and the value that Lloyds brings to the insurance industry?
I will. Now, I will take you back to 1688, right? So this is a time that is so different to the one we're in now, where we're communicating across the Atlantic in a digital fashion like this. In the heart of the city of London, it was dirty, grimy, noisy. But merchants were gathering because the port of London, right by the city of London, the financial district of London at that time, was getting really busy. So the merchants were starting to export and import and ship goods around the world. And a coffee house opened that was run by an Edward Lloyd. Now, in those days, a lot of coffee shops were around, and they used to specialize in a certain sector or area. Now, Edward Lloyd and his coffee shop decided to specialize in maritime news, so that the merchants, ship owners, they would all gather at his coffee shop to get the latest news. Perhaps a ship had been lost at sea to weather or to pirates or something. So he became this sort of hub. And then they all and they were all men, all these guys were standing around or perhaps sitting around and saying, well, gosh, it might be my shipment, my ship I lose, my cargo. Why don't we start sharing the risk? And that was how Lloyd started to share risk. And it was done in the form of, the voyage, the ship would be all documented. And then people who wanted to take a share of that, they would write their name and a percentage of the risk that they were going to take. And they would write it under each name. So you had the term underwriter sort of being born.
Yeah.
And then, of course, if that ship was lost, they had to pay out. And that was the original founding. That was the start of Lloyd's. And then over years, the next thing, we had the motor vehicle come along. And in fact, Lloyd's was the first insurer or the first body to insure a motor vehicle. So the first policy, it would describe the car as a vessel on wheels because it didn't have any other way of describing it. And from there, Lloyd's got a reputation for insuring things for the first time. So any new thing that came along, any new invention, any crazy idea, Lloyd's was there to insure it. It did the first D&O insurance. It, did the first time a satellite went up into space. It did the first flight of an aircraft. And it just got known for taking the new risks on. And the reason it did that was because of that sharing, that subscription approach, which meant that you could take just a little bit for your balance sheet, for your syndicate, as it was called, and you'd share it with others. And so there was a collective safety and a collective knowledge that was building up, and people had the courage to take little bits of these new risks. And Lloyd's has continued to do that today. When I left, it was the leading underwriter of cyber insurance, for instance. Anything new that came along, a threat, a risk, Lloyd's would be there insuring it. And it does about $40 billion of premium every year as a market.
Yeah, that's so impressive. And so the story that I heard when there was a large claim that would happen, like a ship would go down or some major incident, they would ring the bell, and I believe it's called the lutein bell. Can you talk about the significance of the bell and when it's rung in current times?
Yeah. So the bell was rescued from one of the shipwrecks. So the ship was found at the bottom of the ocean, and they rescued the Bell from the ship, the Lutine. And it does sit in the middle of the Lloyds trading room. So Lloyds has a building in London. It does business all over the world, but in London, it has a special sort of trading environment where people pre-pandemic, pre-COVID, were meeting face to face. And in the old days, the Lutine Bell was rung if there was a shipwreck at sea or if there was a big disaster. And the bell would be rung, and then all the brokers would huddle into the middle and hear the news about the latest disaster and what had gone wrong. That stopped many years ago. And when I was there, yes, it was rung, but it was actually rung on a happy occasion when there was the birth of a royal member of the family.
Oh, wow.
Member of the royal family.
Yeah.
And I believe we did do it once in memory. There was a big terrorist attack, and we did ring it then, but it was very, very seldom. And it would be for a very, very special or very, very sad event, and it would not be done regularly anymore.
And to anyone that's interested in Lloyd's, if anybody's ever in London that's listening to this, I would highly recommend going to Lloyd's and getting a tour of the building and hearing about the history, because they have the bell in there, and they have, I think there's a large book that breaks down.
There's the logbook.
Yes.
The claims logbook. And every day, one of the waiters, as they're called, so these are the guys who are looking after the physical market. So if you need anything, they're there to help you. They don't serve coffee though anymore. But they will write, one of them will write every day with a beautiful italic pen. They will write in this book the date, and then if any ships are lost at sea, they will write it down in that book that day. Now, they don't do anything other than ships. So even though Lloyd's now insures many other things, it's only the ships that are recorded there. But all of those books and the history are kept. So we've got the Titanic listed in there. So when the Titanic was lost. Yeah, even that's listed in one of the books. So it's a very fine tradition. And when I was at Lloyd's, one of the important things was to keep some of those traditions alive, because they were they were important to some people, and they were symbolic. And so we had to always choose what we were going to modernize and get rid of, what we were maybe going to twist a little, and not get rid of completely, but just twist it a little bit, and then what we were going to keep in its true format. And that was a difficult balance all the way through the 5 years I was there to try and get that right. And I didn't always get it right.
Obviously, times have changed in the last year or so with the COVID-19 pandemic. How do you think Lloyd's has fared throughout the pandemic?
Well, it's because of the digitized platform. Fortunately, even though we had no idea that this was coming down the line when we did the digitalization, the business is placed over an electronic platform. So people were able to go and work from home and keep the market alive and kicking, if you like. And actually, it's very interesting, because I've spoken to some people who, during the pandemic, have had to work from home, and they sort of go, do you know, Inga, now I get it. Now I sort of get why it was so essential, because this is actually the way of the world. And if we hadn't been able to work in this fashion, we could be potentially left behind. And so it's really reassured people that you don't need this physical face-to-face trading environment anymore to be successful and to do business, and to keep sort of pushing on the edge of risk as well. I mean, you can keep track of all of the emerging risks and still be transforming and creating new products as well. We also, though, when I was there, created something called the Lloyds Lab. And this was important for me because I wanted to make sure that Lloyd's was kept fresh, and that we didn't get stale and tired and keep doing the same old thing, even though we put technology in. So we did introduce a Lloyd's Lab, which is they choose a cohort of probably anything to 10 to 20 sort of startups, people with ideas. They then have about 10 weeks to prove their idea, work in the lab. If someone in the market thinks it's a good idea, then they will then back them, and they can carry on developing their new product or their new distribution idea or whatever it is. So we did embed that to give also this ongoing creative sort of ability, for it to sort of actually be like a melting pot, like a real lab where you invent things.
Do you have any advice for someone that's looking to climb the corporate ladder and one day become the CEO of a very large company?
Well, it needs some hard work and it needs some resilience. But the thing that I learned many, many years ago, and I didn't quite understand how important this was when I first heard it, and it's the pie model. And some of your listeners may be familiar with it. I have talked about it a few times in the past. It's PIE. P is for performance. So whatever you do in your job, whatever your job is, you have to perform it well. Okay, there is no doubt about it. You've got to be good at your job and perform well. But you must also think of the I, which is the image. Now, I can remember years ago not thinking that really mattered. And when I moved to Germany from the US, I remember having my new team around me in Germany, and they said, Inga, we're German, and you mustn't judge us on how we are presenting ourselves, how we come across. And I said, well, okay, that's fair enough, and I will try not to judge you. But just think about all the other people that you're trying to make an impact on. So if you want to move on up in the ranks of a US business, you're going to have to come across in the way that the US business recognizes as good, and you can communicate well. Mm-hmm. So I always said the image matters. You can make an impression instantly. And the reason I actually one of the reasons I got the job in the US and got offered the job was because one of the big bosses from the US was visiting London. I was talking to him. I didn't really know who he was. I didn't know how senior he was or important he was. I was talking to him at the beginning of this meeting, and he remembered that small conversation. And many, many months later, when he was looking to hire someone, he remembered me. And it was just a silly little conversation we had. But I'd made an impression on him. So the I and the image and how you come across is important. And then there's the E, which is the exposure. And don't think exposure means going along just to a networking event and whatever they are these days virtually, but a networking event and, mixing with the same people that you already know well. That is not about increasing your exposure or doing good networking. Think strategically about your networking whenever you go anywhere. Make sure you're meeting new people. Mm-hmm. Get involved in activities and things that are outside of your day job. So just offer yourself up. Don't be siloed. Think broadly. People want to work with you you'll get opportunities in the future to manage if they know you've got a broad experience. So volunteer and get involved in things and just think about that exposure. If you got an opportunity to present somewhere, go and do it. Step in someone's shoes. Ask your manager, can you give me some opportunities for some exposure, please? Mm-hmm. Work on it with your manager. Actually create opportunities to get exposure, because that to me is absolutely critical. And when I came back to London after many years of living outside of London in different countries, and I came back to the Lloyds market, and I realized that I'd lost touch because it was about 15 years that I'd been away. And I know I needed to suddenly get people to know me. So I strategically went and networked, and I asked my PA, my executive assistant, to get me lunch, tea, coffee, elevator conversation, I don't care what it is, with every CEO in the Lloyds markets.
Wow.
And the CEOs of the 10 largest brokers. And that meant about 80 of these meetings I had to do just to introduce myself. And something in me told me I needed to do that. And then when I got to be on the list for the Lloyds CEO job, and the nominating committee and the chair of Lloyds asked the CEOs in the market if they knew me, they all said, oh yes, of course we know Inga. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know that I would be planting a seed for the future, but that's how important exposure and networking is. So PIE, PIE.
PIE, that is an awesome blueprint for everybody to remember. It's so easy and it's so powerful. That's so cool to hear that you did all those things. not only were you the first female CEO in Lloyd's history, but you had to be the first openly bisexual CEO in Lloyd's history. How has coming out influenced your professional career?
Well, of course, when I started, well, not of course, but when I started work in the 80s, I genuinely thought I was a heterosexual woman fighting in a man's world. I was dating men. That was my life. It wasn't, I then went into sort of phase two, which is when I started dating women. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I thought I was a lesbian. So here I was, and I was in a long-term relationship. I was 12 years with one of my partners. She was the one who moved to the US with me, actually, and then France, Germany, Switzerland, etc. And so for many years of my life, I thought I was a lesbian, or classified myself as a lesbian. Then she left me, and I got together with a man again, who I'm married to now. And of course, then I got the label of bisexual. I thought, gosh, well, I didn't go out to seek all these different labels in my life, but here I am. This is me. This is what feels right and natural for me. And this happened just before Lloyd's. So I get to Lloyd's, and then I mean, I don't want to talk about my sexuality particularly at all, actually, at that time. But the Financial Times, who were the sponsors of an outstanding award, outstanding is a recognition award every year for the top 100 LGBT leaders and top 100 LGBT allies. And they approached me to put myself forward. And I said, not on your life. The last thing I need is to have anyone focusing on my sexuality. I've got to get respected for the job I'm doing here. I cannot talk about it. But then when I started having conversations in town halls, and I started to get concerned at the lack of diversity, I started to see hardly any women in senior positions. I saw hardly any black or brown faces. Nobody was talking about being gay or anything unless they were being perhaps rude or making a nasty remark about someone. And so I realized that actually I probably needed to get out there and be out about it and be a role model. So the next year, I did actually say, okay, I'll put my hand up and I will put myself forward. I didn't know I would come top of the list that year, but that was another thing. But of course, what happened was it did unleash some nasty comments. So I did get hate mail and actually some quite revolting and disgusting messages from different parts of the world, I would say. But more and more, I got positive support from people who said, thank you. Thank you for being a role model, and thank you for being out. And in fact, I wish I had been out and vocal about it much earlier. I was in the closet when I was lesbian. I was in the closet for most of the time. And I didn't actually come out at work at all until I joined the Zurich group, which was in 2008. So I learnt over the years the power of role models and being out there and outspoken about it to encourage others.
Yes, your perspective is so valuable here. What do you think the insurance industry can do to grow a culture of diversity and inclusion?
Well, we're on our way. We've got the Dive In Festival. It was in its 6th year last year. I didn't know what that would start at the beginning. Now, the Dive In Festival is in September, and it's a festival celebrating, if you like, diversity and inclusion. And the first year we did it, which was 2015, it was only in London, and it was only around the Lloyds building. And I was very, very, very nervous because I knew that there were many people being rude and critical of me for doing this. But I said, it's the right thing. I've got to do it. And what happened with that first one was it unleashed all sorts of conversations, and it empowered people to say, actually, we've got to do something about this. It's not good enough. We've been putting up with a lack of equal opportunity for too long. And so the next year we actually started going global. And I called up a few friends around the world and said, would you host an event outside of London? And they said yes. And then the next year it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And last year, I don't even know, many, many cities in well over 30 countries across the world, addressing and talking about some of these tricky topics, because some of these topics can be difficult. People can feel very threatened. So, for instance, when women's networks started and got very popular, the men would be very critical and saying, well, what about our network? And I would sort of say, well, actually, you've had your own network for most of the time. I mean, Lloyd's didn't even allow a woman into the underwriting floor until the 1970s. So for 300 years, you just had your own big network. So I did push back a little at that, but sensibly, of course, you've got to have conversations with people from other groups. And with the Black Lives Matter movement now, I really hope that, I mean, it was tragic circumstances, don't get me wrong, but I hope that now people can start thinking really seriously about this, not paying lip service anymore to their diversity and inclusion initiatives, saying this will make a difference. Because I tell you, if we manage to crack this in business, it will seep into broader society. And we have to be aiming for a more equal world. We're missing out on all sorts of talent that doesn't want to even perhaps work for you, never mind stay with you once they're there, if you don't have an inclusive and equal environment. So the insurance sector, we do need to do some work. I do still see more photos when I read the appointments. I do see more photos of white men still than any black person or any female being promoted and appointed to some of these leadership roles. But slowly I'm seeing more women. And you know what? I'm looking forward to the day when I'm not rejoicing and cheering and whooping because it's a female who's been appointed. Mm-hmm. I want to reach the day when that's just as normal as anyone else being appointed. But we've got to also take the race card seriously. We've got to be more embracing and understanding. And it does, to me, start with perhaps some uncomfortable conversations, perhaps talking to somebody who you wouldn't normally talk to and being open and asking them about something. I will just say one thing that I always remember. When I started at Lloyd's, I did a weekly blog because I thought this will be the last time I'm the CEO for the first time anywhere, because I knew I would go into non-executive life after that. And I thought I'm going to blog every week, just my own personal words. And it got so popular. I was only going to do it actually for the first 3 months, but I carried on doing it for 5 years. But it was very popular. But then there was a blog that was more popular than mine. And it was a guy who'd written all about Ramadan, a Muslim guy. Mm. And I went and sought him out. I went and found him at his desk. And I said, this is fantastic. I said, I'm a bit envious. You've got more likes and comments than I do on my blog, but well done. This is fabulous. Because it started opening up people's eyes to it and feeling that they could ask questions about Ramadan and what does it really mean and how does it work and what do you do, et cetera, et cetera. And he said to me, he said, Inga, I am just so grateful for this opportunity because my previous employer, and he joined Lloyd's since after I had started, he said his previous employer had said to him he was not allowed to talk about religion at work. Mm. And I just thought, wow, how extraordinary that you would do that. But perhaps people think it can get you into sticky situations. But unless we start having these conversations and understand other people's perspectives, understand other people's cultures, start respecting other people for their difference, we won't really be able to move the needle and move on. So lots of work, and you've got to attack it from all angles. But I know that there's a lot of people out there now who will sort of carry this forward and keep driving for diversity and inclusion.
This is why I wanted to have you on the show. Because 2021, I don't know if there is, there are more important issues to face. And I think from where you came from, the experience that you had, the groundbreaking things that you did, I think you are one of the best voices to comment on these issues. So I really appreciate your perspective there.
And, the thing is, with the COVID situation, we know that some equality that perhaps women were gathering has gone backwards. So across the world, there will be 5% more women who will be negatively impacted by COVID than men because of the kinds of jobs they do. And therefore, the sort of the equality, at least for gender, is going to actually have taken a bit of a step backward during COVID, which is a bit sad. And so I just hope that people can be very mindful of moving forward when we get all the vaccines done and we can sort of start to have a more normal world, whatever that is. Let's consider other people still. Let's not put it to one side. It's got to be part and front and center of your strategy, because guaranteed, if you get those diverse voices around the table, you will be more successful. Your business will be more creative, more innovative. You'll understand particularly what different generations want and people who are different to you want as customers. And that's the crux of it. It is an absolutely business benefit if you do it.
And that's a great transition to my next question. What are your thoughts on the future for Lloyd's?
Well, it's going to continue to move forward. Absolutely. And it's got to, because when it started, of course, there were no real competitors doing specialty insurance. It was really only Lloyd's. And of course, the world has changed, and underwriting knowledge and expertise, and particularly with computers, technology, artificial intelligence, etc., there is a challenge out there to keep ahead. But Lloyd's has always adapted. Just think of all of the crises it's been through in its life. It will always be there because it has such a fantastic reputation across the world. And people want to be part of it. They know that you can get access to amazing new product coverages, but also the talent wants to be there. So providing they keep embracing technology, thinking differently about how they get the new offers out there, so the new coverages, and make sure they don't become too restrictive in their underwriting, because we already know that risk managers, and it's not a Lloyd's issue, it's an insurance issue in general, that risk managers are saying, look, insurers, you're covering less and less of my risks these days. I know I've got a changing risk landscape. I know I've got all these intangible risks that are difficult to get my arms around, but I need your help. And the whole insurance sector needs to really step up to the plate and stop shying away from all the new risks and really try and embrace it. And of course, Lloyd's has the perfect model for that because of the sharing and the syndication of the risk in the market.
Mm-hmm. There's no doubt Lloyd's seems to be the perfect vessel for it. And again, for anybody listening to this, if you're in the insurance industry in the US and you're not familiar with Lloyd's, I would highly recommend doing some research on it, seeing how you can access the various syndicates within Lloyd's. If you're going through wholesale channels, how you get there, because a lot of times you're going to get products that are far more competitive than products that you would get with typical US domestic carriers. So the next topic I'm also really excited about, Inga. I'm so interested in this, and I don't know a ton about it, obviously, because I'm American, but you are a dame, and from what I know, that is the female version of a knight. How does one become a dame, and how did it happen for you?
Well, first of all, it was completely unexpected. I had no idea. But it's a pretty important thing and a very, very special thing. Now, you may be familiar with someone like Sir Elton John. So yep. Elton John got recognized for his fantastic contribution to the music industry. So he got knighted some time ago. I got nominated, because of what I was doing, leading Lloyd's, taking it forward, because we were doing lots of new things. We were modernizing with technology, but we were opening up in new markets. We went to Dubai, to China. We were opening up in other parts of the Americas and things like that. So we were doing lots of new things. So for the award, and I got awarded for the work I'd done for the economy and for the for women and for the LGBT community. So for the economy, I was CEO of Lloyd's, and that was, in their eyes, in the people, the powers that be, basically it is actually called the Queen's Honours, but of course the government and everything, teams of people put the list together, and it goes through committees who decide who will get it. So fundamentally, I was for my sort of day job and my contribution to the UK economy, but to get something like a knighthood or a damehood, you have to have done something else. So some amazing charitable work or something else that you're doing that you're not being paid for. And I got the additional piece for me was the work I was doing in leading diversity and inclusion in the City of London, in the financial centre of London. So that was the sort of two aspects behind my award. And when I did get that letter, I actually put it to one side because the language was so complicated. I didn't really know what it was telling me. I just saw that it said Buckingham Palace on the top of the letterhead. And it talked about, Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire. And I just thought, what is this? I really didn't know. I put it to one side. I went back to it a few minutes later, showed it to my husband. I said, do you think this is what I think it is? Is this a damehood? He said, I think you're right. And it was a wonderful experience. Went to Buckingham Palace. As women, we don't get knighted as such because we never went to battle. So if you're a man, real sexism going on here. If you're a man, you kneel in front of royalty. It could be the Queen. I had Prince Charles. They have a sword and they do touch your shoulder if you're the guy, and they knight you like that. Women didn't traditionally go into battle, so we don't get knighted like that. We just get a medal put on our chest here and another medal on our waist. So that's our ceremony. It's slightly different, and we don't kneel.
Okay.
But a very, very special time, and I was thrilled to be recognised.
That's epic. Are there any special privileges, or do they give you a sword, or anything like that comes along with damehood?
There are, in a way, there are privileges because it can open doors at times, but I never want to abuse that. But it doesn't really, so there's no financial reward or anything like that. You get to keep your medal, which has a certain nominal value, but even that, it's nothing very expensive. But it's more the sort of prestige, the feeling it gives you, the pride you have, I suppose, which also then makes you want to perhaps do more and give back more to society and the community.
Okay, well, my last question for you, Inga, is what is next for Inga Beale?
Well, I'm doing a lot of things. I'm chairing a private healthcare and hospital group, which is new for me, to learn all about the healthcare sector and particularly hospitals, because we're in the front line of COVID. So that's been an amazing learning experience. I also sit on a couple of other boards. I sit on Crawford and Company, which is a US company. I also do quite a bit of pro bono work. And for instance, I'm patron of Ensuring Women's Futures, which is a movement looking at trying to get women financially independent, because just some research we did in the UK highlighted that on average, women in the UK have 20% of the wealth when they retire than men do. On average. And that's a vast gap to think that on average, men have 5 times more than the women do. And that's in a so-called civilized society like the UK.
Right.
When we uncovered that over 5 years ago, I said, we've got to do something about this. And so I'm patron of that. And we're making some policy changes, working with government, working with the insurance industry, so that they can make changes to try and close that gap so that women can be more financially independent. And I do a few other things. I do a lot of talking, particularly around the LGBT community, for LGBT History Month as well. Things like that. Again, role model, trying to inspire and motivate others to come out of the closet and aim high in their careers.
Inga, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I have to say, before the pandemic hit, I had a trip planned to London to go to Lloyd's last July. And I was so bummed when it didn't work out. But I feel like we're kind of hitting the home stretch here with vaccines coming out. And so I would love to get a London trip on the books when we can. It would be great to connect with you in person. And I will plan on speaking with you soon.
Yeah, good. I hope so. I hope that trip to London comes off soon.
Thanks, Inga.
Thank you very much. Thanks.